Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today I wanted to take a look at one of the most underrated mini gaming PCs on the market right now. This thing is capable of playing newer AAA games at 1080p, and we can even run some older stuff at 1440 over 60 FPS, and that's because this tiny PC actually has a dedicated ARC GPU. It's a pretty powerful little unit because it's the Intel ARC A730M, and given that Intel has put out so many updates for their ARC GPUs, increasing the performance across the board, I figured it was time to take another look at this unit. Now, there's a lot of other interesting things going on with this mini PC, and this is known as the MINISFORUM HN2673. It's got one of the best cooling systems that I've seen in these gaming mini PCs because over here on the left-hand side, it's got a cooler for that Intel ARC A730M and it's got a cooler for the CPU. So they're both over here. We've got 4 fans, and when it comes to that GPU, it's actually an MXM form factor. As you can see, without the stand on it, it's actually a really small form factor PC. I personally like setting it up vertically, but you could lay it on the desk horizontally if you want to. And over on this side, it's got a bracketing system with all the cabling we need to add 2.5-inch hard drives or SSDs, so we can add a sufficient amount of storage to this thing also. Now moving over to the other side, really easy to get in here, but upgrading the SSD is a bit of a chore. Now it's not totally impossible, you just have to remove a couple of these fans, but as you can see, we've got 4 fans here sitting on top of MINISFORUM's unique cooling system for this mini PC. So over on the left-hand side, here's our CPU cooler. We've got an i7 CPU. I'll go over the full specs in a second. And if you take a look at the right-hand side, this is the cooler for that ARC A730M. Now the M stands for mobile, but the way this is set up is MXM. It actually slots in here, and if you're not familiar with the MXM form factor, it stands for Mobile PCIe Express Module, and we've actually seen this in some really high-end laptops, so you could replace that GPU. The one on screen right now isn't exactly the A730, but it's very similar. So they do need to add their own cooling solution to this, but it just slots right into the motherboard. And in theory, you could upgrade the GPU in here if you could find a more powerful MXM GPU. So with this mini PC, we've got a dedicated graphics card. And when it comes to the overall specs for the CPU, this is powered by the Intel i7-12650H. 10 cores, 16 threads, 6 performance cores up to 4.7 GHz, and 4 efficiency cores up to 3.5. We can do up to 64 gigabytes of DDR4 at 3200 megatransfers per second running in dual channel with this mini PC. And of course, instead of using the built-in UHD iGPU, we're going to be utilizing the Intel ARC A730. Has 24 Xe cores, 24 ray tracing units, and the core clock in this can actually boost up to 2050 megahertz. The way I've got this one configured is 16 gigabytes of RAM, a 1 terabyte M.2 drive, and we're going to be running Windows 11 Pro on this thing. Now, I'll tell you what, when these Intel ARC graphics cards were released, they weren't putting out great performance. I mean, they could definitely play games, but over time, with their driver optimizations, just for instance, here's a changelog for their latest driver. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, up to 65% average FPS at 1080p with medium settings. We're constantly getting new updates from Intel for these ARC GPUs, and they really do have a lot to gain from their drivers, as opposed to the other 2 big GPU manufacturers on the market right now. Those are really fleshed out. With this, definitely newer technology, and these drivers are really helping in the performance area. Alright, so I've got everything updated, got a bunch of stuff installed that we're going to be testing out, and one of the main things you need to keep in mind with these Intel ARC GPUs is the driver update. You just need to make sure you're up to date. They've been releasing a ton of new updates, fixing lots of problems, increasing performance dramatically across the board. As you can see, we've got that Core i7-12650H, 16 gigs of DDR4 at 3200 megahertz. We've got access to the UHD graphics here with that 12650H, but we're not going to rely on those. We've got that ARC A730M, 6 gigs of VRAM, and I will show you TDP and everything like that. But we've also got access to the ARC Control Center. Now with the desktop variants of these ARC GPUs, from performance, we usually have some settings that we can mess around with, like upping that TDP. With this, it's kind of right out of the box because it is a mobile variant, but it's in that MXM form factor. We've also got our game launcher. From here, we can customize each one of these games from our frame delivery, post-processing, 3D overrides. Right now, I've got mine set up as global settings. So everything we're going to be testing will use those global settings from the ARC control panel. Not much that I've tweaked and tuned from here, but again, keep these drivers updated because they can really up that FPS. I also wanted to give you a look at just TDP out of the box with the CPU and GPU here. So from CPU-Z, I'm just going to run a quick stress test. Right here, you'll see it jump up to around 80 watts, which is really good for this chip. I mean, we can hit those boost clocks we need. And of course, when it comes to that GPU, the ARC A730M, we're just going to put a massive load on this thing. Our maximum clock here is 2050 megahertz, and this runs at up to around 90 watts. Now that's at full boat. This is kind of an extreme test here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what kind of power this thing's going to be pulling. And remember, this GPU power is not split up between the CPU and GPU. This is a dedicated GPU in this mini PC. Next thing I wanted to take a look at were some GPU benchmarks, and the first one we have here is the OpenCL benchmark in Geekbench 6. We got a total score of 73,015, and if we go down their list, they do have a Geekbench OpenCL browser over on their website. And this is coming in just a bit ahead of the RTX 4050 laptop variant. And of course, I mean, we've got a mobile variant here, just in a desktop PC. So this ARC A730 is looking pretty competitive when it comes to 1080p gaming. Next up, we've got 3D Mark Night Raid with a 48,879. Firestrike coming in with a pretty impressive 16,944. And finally, Time Spy with an 8,957. Graphics score up at the top, 8,830. So yeah, just judging by these synthetic benchmark scores, we should be able to get some 1080p AAA gaming out of the way on this, and with a little bit of room to spare. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you could definitely do newer games at 1080, and if you wanted to go through your backlog, older stuff like Skyrim, 1440, high, maxed out, over 60 FPS, but the first game we have here is Helldivers 2, 1080p, high settings, we got an average of 65. I was actually expecting to see a little more, but when it comes to those ARC drivers, there could be an update next week that definitely ups this performance. Either way, I mean, at 1080, high settings, looking really good here. It's definitely playable. I also tested Shadow of the Tomb Raider just using that built-in benchmark. High settings, 1080, we had an average of 68 FPS. Mortal Kombat 1, 1080, high, and we're not using any kind of resolution scale. We could always go with Intel XeSS, but we're at a true 1080p here, high settings, looking really good, and you might see some screen tearing. That's my game capture wasn't synced up correctly with the correct refresh rate of my monitor. No screen tearing while I was playing the game on the monitor itself, but we're getting a constant 60 across the board. Fighting games on this are going to work great at 1080p. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is one of those I've always had issues with on lower-end GPUs, be it iGPUs or dedicated GPUs here. Not too bad. By the end, we had an average of 72 FPS, and you can see we get much higher every once in a while. 1080p, high settings, no resolution scale. Spider-Man Miles Morales 1080p high, by the end, average of 77 FPS. And with all of this stuff, just turning VSync on, trying to lock it down at 60, you're going to have a really nice experience with this mini PC. I also tested out Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 using the built-in benchmark. We're at 1080 with the balanced preset. I've also got XeSS set to balance. With this benchmark, we had an average of 92 FPS and a low of 72. So we're well over that threshold. This is another one of those really playable games. And the final game I wanted to test out here was Cyberpunk 2077. I was really surprised by the performance here, given that we're using an ARC GPU. We've definitely had some issues with drivers and this game here, but at 1080p high, with XeSS set to balance, we had an average of 81 FPS. So yeah, I mean, with all of these driver updates, this little PC with that ARC A730M is doing a really good job at 1080p. Now, the last thing I wanted to take a look at was just total system power consumption. Like I showed you when we got into Windows, the CPU will boost up to 80 watts, the GPU will boost up to 90, and those are extreme use case scenarios. At idle from the wall using a kilowatt meter, this is pulling around 26 watts. Average 1080p gaming jumps up to 152, and the maximum that I could get this to pull in an extreme test, maxing out the CPU and GPU at the same time, 237 watts. So significantly more than a smaller PC with just an iGPU, but we are seeing some but we are seeing much better performance out of something like this when you compare it. Overall, I do think that this is a really awesome concept, given that we've got that MXM GPU. Now, if we could get our hands on more powerful MXM GPUs and replace it in here, that would be really cool. And I was really hoping that MINISFORUM was going to come out with a line of mini PCs and MXM GPUs that we could kind of pick and choose what we want to add to this system. I think that would be really awesome, but what we've got here with that ARC A730M, I think it's a great 1080p machine, and Intel has been doing a really good job with their driver updates and increasing performance on these ARC GPUs. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Wanted to take another look at this one. I do think it's kind of underrated. It's an awesome performer, and if you're interested in learning a little more, I will leave some links down below. If there's anything else you want to see running on this PC, let me know in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.